Jasuranandana Braja Jana Ramachana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari 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 Ravi Jana Vallabha Dinadari Ravi Jana Vallabha Dinadari Jaya Ravi Jana Vallabha Dinadari Ravi Jana Vallabha Yasudanandana Braja Jana Ramachana Yasudanandana Braja Jana Ramachana Yasudanandana Braja Jana Ramachana Yasudanandana Braja Jana Ramachana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Tinatimirandasya Jananjana Salakaya Chaksunilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam
Naram Chaiva Narottamam
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam
Devim Saraswati Vyasam
Tato Jayamudiraya.
Tato Jayamudiraya.
Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead, Narayan, unto Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Nashtapreshu Bhadreshu
Nastapreshu Bhadreshu
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya
Bhagavati Uttamas Loke
Bhagavati Uttamas
Bhaktim Bhakti Naistaki. By regular attendance in class on the Bhagavatam and by rendering service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. So, we are studying in the third canto, Status Quo, chapter 7, titled Further Inquiries by Vidura, text 16. Sal Etan Paritam Vidvan Sadetan Vyaitam Vidvan Natma Mayayanam Harer Natman Mayayanam Harer Abhati Apartam Nirmulam Abhati Apartam Nirmulam Vishvamulam Na Yad Vahi Vishvamulam Nayad Vahi Aletan Yadvitam Vidvam Natma Mayayanam Harer Adhati Apatam Nirmulam Vishvamulam Nayad Vahi Sadetat Varitam Vidvan Natma Mayayanam Harer Ahati Apartam Nirmulam Vishvamulam Nayad Vahi
Natma Mayayanam
Hari
Abhati Apartam Nirmulam Vishvamulam Nayad Vahi
Natmamayanam Hare. Avrakyapartam Nirulam Vishwamulam Nayavahi.
Sabedadyartam vidvam
Sadetadyaditam Vidvam
Natmamayanam Hare
Natmamayanam Hare.
Abhatiyapartam nirmulam
Avrakyapartam Nirulam
Vishwamulam nayavahi
Vishwamulam Nayavahi.
Sadvetadvyatam vidvam
Sadetadyaditam Vidvam
Natmamayanam Hare
Natmamayanam Hare.
Bhakyapartam nirmulam
Avrakyapartam Nirulam
Vishwamulam nayavahi
Vishwamulam Nayavahi. As good as it should be.
Such as it should be.
Etan,
Etan,
all these expansions.
all these
Yaritam,
Yaritam,
thus spoken.
thus spoken.
Vidvan,
Vidvan,
O learned one.
O learned one.
Nam,
Nam,
not.
not.
Atma,
Atma,
the self.
the self.
Maya,
Maya,
energy.
energy.
Ayanam,
Ayanam,
movement.
movement.
Harer, of the personality of Godhead.
Of the personality of Godhead.
Abhati,
Abhati,
appears.
Appears.
Apartam,
Apartam,
without meaning.
without meaning.
Nirmulam,
Nirmulam.
without basis.
Without basis.
Vishvamulam,
Vishwamulam.
the origin is the supreme.
The
Origin is the supreme.
Nam,
Nam,
not.
not.
Yat,
Yat,
which.
which.
Bahi,
Bahi,
outside.
outside.
Translation, purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. O learned sage, your explanations are very good, as they should be. Disturbances to the conditioned soul have no other basis than the movement of the external energy of the Lord. Please repeat. O learned sage,
O learned sage,
your explanations are very good,
your explanations are very good,
as they should be.
as they should be.
Disturbances to the conditioned soul
Disturbances to the conditioned soul
have no other basis
have no other basis
than the movement of the external energy of the Lord.
than the movement of the external energy of the Lord.
A living entity's unlawful desire to become one with the Lord in every respect is the root cause of the entire material manifestation. For otherwise the Lord has no need to create such a manifestation, even for his pastimes. The conditioned soul, under the spell of the external energy of the Lord, falsely suffers many unfortunate incidents in material life. The Lord is the predominator of the external energy Maya, whereas the living entity is predominated by the same Maya under the material condition. The false attempt of the living entity to occupy the predominating post of the Lord is the cause of his material bondage, and the conditioned soul's attempt to become one with the Lord is the last snare of Maya. Vandeham Shri Guru, Shri Uttapadakamam, Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha, Shri Rupam Sarvachatam, Sadhana Raghunam Samhitam Tam Sajivam, Sadvaitam Sadvadutam, Parijana Sahitam, Krishna Chaitanya Devam, Shri Radha Krishna Padam, Sadhana Lalita, Shri Shikaratam Cha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu, Dina Bandhu Jagapate, Gopisa Gopika Kanta Radhakanta Namosute, Tapta Kanchana Gauranga Radhe Vrindavaneshwari, Vishabhanu Sute Devi, Pranamami Hari Priye. Panchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So we've been relishing Vidura's inquiries about Krishna, the creation of the material world, and the living entities' involvement in it, and the coverings, capacity over the living entity, quivering effects. And in the last verse, Vidura started glorifying Maitreya for his answers to his questions, because his answers are so glorious. And the last verse he said, "O powerful sage, my Lord, all my doubts about the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity have now been removed by your covering, by your convincing words. My mind is now perfectly entering into them." So through the process of learning real knowledge and engaging in devotional service, one can revive their lost consciousness of pure loving devotional service to the Lord. And this one sentence where he says, "My mind is now perfectly entering into them," entering into the words. And this is our process, is that we come and we learn and we enter into the words of the Lord, or his acharyas, his teachers, so that entering into them, we take them on, we imbibe them into our consciousness, into our being. And Vidura is glorifying Maitreya's explanations in themselves because they bring peace to the humble, submissive soul who is properly hearing. So, Gyan is important, but Gyan without Bhakti is not sufficient. Gyan by itself is very restrained, and one cannot philosophically come to the level of becoming liberated. One needs to have devotional service as well. And on the path of devotional service, one doesn't have to wait for the results like one has to in performing karma kanda or in performing jnana kanda, where they have to wait for the results of knowledge. And the Bhagavad Gita perfectly explains this in the 14th chapter, verse 26. Mam chayo vani bhakti yogena sevate sadhuna santitartaitam brahma bhutyaya kalpate. One who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. So just by transferring one's consciousness into the transcendental activities of Krishna consciousness, Krishna's activities, is known as Bhakti Yoga, and that's always acting for Krishna. One who is engaged in service to Krishna or any of his forms or plenary expansions is considered to be transcendentally situated, although these modes of material nature are very difficult to overcome. One can overcome them easily through this process. And what is that? It's an exchange of love. It's that simple. It's simply an exchange of love between the Lord and the living entity. And Prabhupada explains in the Bhagavad Gita in the introduction that the bee on the outside of the honey jar has no idea how sweet that honey is. He needs to open the jar and taste the honey. So the living entity needs to actually get involved in devotional service in order to taste and relish transcendental devotional service. There's two persons present, the Supreme Lord and the living entity. And this exchange of love, there needs to be individuality. You can never merge with the Lord and have that loving exchange. We need to be in spiritual consciousness to serve the Lord. And Srila Prabhupada gives a great example, like the servant of the king. A servant of the king, they just don't pull someone off the street to serve the king. They train them on what the king likes and how the king likes to be served. And so that the servant can do an appropriate job. And that's what Srila Prabhupada has given us with all these temples and all the books. He's given us the ability to learn how to properly serve the Supreme Lord. So acquiring the qualification of Brahman, a spiritual qualification, which is beyond the modes of material nature. And instead of losing our individual identity, quite the contrary, we actually come in contact with our individual identity and learn who we actually are. And that's what real self-realization is. Not losing our identity and merging into the Supreme. The hearing process is the most important. Hearing is the most important sense. And Prabhupada gives the example, if a person is sleeping and you are super ninja, you can sneak into the room. But if you make one little bit of noise, that person will wake up. And similarly, we are being woken up by hearing the transcendental sound vibrations. They remove us from the material energy. This name of Krishna, these 16 syllables, are from the spiritual sky. The name Krishna is non-different than Krishna. And it has all the potency of Krishna. All his opulences, all his incarnations are present in this sweet name. So, sounds are very important. Words are very important. And Maitreya is being so merciful to Vidura here by giving him these words that help the soul end that quivering quality and calms the living entity. There's a great story in the Mahabharata about Bhima, the second brother of the Pandavas. He was the son of the wind god and a brother of Hanuman, who we know Hanuman is so powerful. So Bhima was also extremely powerful. And even as a young child, he never let the Kurus forget that he could run faster, he could hit harder, he could climb higher, and he could wrestle better than any of them, which really caused them quite a bit of distress, especially Duryodhana. They were quite envious of the Pandavas and all their special qualities. But one day, Duryodhana went to his father, Dhritarashtra, the blind king, and told him, he says, I can't take this Bhima any longer. Mind you, Duryodhana at this time was a young boy. They were all young boys. And Duryodhana is telling Dhritarashtra a plan to kill Bhima. And Dhritarashtra actually got a little disturbed. He was saying, oh, no, you can't do this. His father, Pandu, is my brother, younger brother, but he took care of me like an older brother. He'd lead me around because I was blind, and he helped me sit, he helped me go places, he helped me eat. I'm so indebted to him. We cannot kill his son. And Duryodhana convinced him, he says, you just stay quiet. You just be quiet. Don't say anything. I'll take care of everything. So he arranged a picnic, and he invited the Kurus. And he invited the Pandavas. And they went out and played at this picnic, and Bhima pushed them all around, threw some of them here and there. And then they came to sit down and eat. And Duryodhana arranged a big cake for Bhima, because Bhima was such a voracious eater. Everyone knew what a voracious eater he was. And so they brought this cake that was full of poison. He gave it just to Bhima. They knew he would eat it all. And he did. He ate every bit of that cake, and then he lay down and fell asleep. And most of the Kurus took the Pandavas, the 4 other Pandavas, off to play, and Duryodhana and a few others stayed back. What's wrong? He hasn't even died yet. That's all right, we'll take care of this. So they tied him up and took him to the river. Now, not just any place in the river, they took him to where there were these really poisonous snakes. were a den of poisonous snakes who lived in this part of the river, and they threw Bhima into the river, and his body was so condensed it made this huge splash of noise and disturbed the snakes, and they came out immediately and attacked him. And they bit him all over. Now, probably an ordinary person that would have been finished, but not for Bhima, because actually their poison counteracted the poison of the king. And it cured him, and he woke up immediately. And he broke the ropes that tied him. The snakes were so amazed, they took him to see the king of the snakes. And he was so amazed and impressed by this Bhima that he gave him a nectar that made him even more powerful. Meanwhile, the four Pandavas, Yudhisthira, Arjuna, Nirpal, and Sahadev, looked everywhere and they couldn't find their brother. And they went home. And they went home with trepidation, because if any of you who have had a mother, or any of you who are mothers, know when a child doesn't come home, only terror can reign in your heart. And they came home without Bhima. Kunti was beside herself. She was so overwrought with anguish. She went to Vidura, her only friend in the palace, and asked Vidura, "What do I do? Bhima hasn't come back." And Vidura was so kind. He said, "Wasn't it proclaimed that he would live a long life, a successful long life?" And she said, "Yes." He says, "So there's no need to worry. There's no need to be in anxiety." Immediately this pacified Kunti so much. And this is actually another example of loving exchanges between devotees, because we all come into those times when we become overwhelmed by the most material nature and the power of them, but through his devotee association and proper counsel. And there's a lot to that, to unpack with loving exchanges between the devotees, but in the confidential exchanges, which are confidential unless something is being exchanged that might harm someone or harm themselves, one should keep it confidential. But it's an opportunity to share these transcendental realizations with each other. And knowledge has, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that this knowledge has qualification as well. That this confidential knowledge may never be explained to those who are not austere or devoid, or devoted or engaged in devotional service, nor to one who is envious of me. So if one's not really following the process, it's very difficult for one to grasp or comprehend what's going on here. And Srila Prabhupada says living entities' desire to become one with the Lord in every respect is the root cause of the entire material manifestation. Is that this desire comes from envy of the Lord. And Lord Chaitanya's first teaching was Jivera Sarupa Hoy Nicha Krishna Das, that we are the eternal servitors of Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada, in a room conversation in London in 1975, he was saying there are two kinds of bodies, the gross and the subtle body. The gross body is a material body combined with earth, water, air, fire, ether. And the subtle body is a combination of the mind, intelligence, and false ego. So within that, there is a spirit soul. So that is eternal. And the gross body and subtle body is changing according to the change of the situation. So when you remain in your spiritual body, that is eternal. Therefore, to keep in spiritual body is to accept devotional service. Then you are beyond this gross material body. At the time of death means giving up this body. Then, in spiritual body, you go back to Godhead. So in order to keep yourself in spiritual body, you should always be engaged in devotional service And that is stated in this verse in the Bhagavad Gita, 14:26. Mam chayo vaibhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sadhanam samadhitatam brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who is engaged in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the mode of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. So not only that as we engage in devotional service, it removes material anxiety, and it needs to be noted that there is transcendental anxiety. And somebody once asked Srila Prabhupada, what did Arjuna feel when his son was killed on the battlefield? His son, Abhimanyu, was killed in a grievous way, in a very unfair way in the Battle of Kurukshetra. And Srila Prabhupada explained, yes, he felt pain, he felt sorrow, but he got up the next day and he fought in the battle. And that's the difference between devotees and one who's overcome by material consciousness. It's that ability to keep doing our devotional service and taking the instructions of the spiritual master. So I have a couple minutes. If you don't have any questions, I'll tell one more pastime. Yes.
Yes, one more passage.
Oh, so Bilamangal Thakur, and the reason I'm telling this one is because he was able to take instruction from a prostitute. So even good instruction, wherever it comes from, we should be able to appreciate it. But he was a son of a Brahmin who had actually fallen. It became degraded because he became attached to this prostitute. However, the prostitute was a Vaishnavi. So it was his father had passed, and his responsibility to preside over the funeral of his father.
Jai Shri Panchatattva.
And after the funeral, this huge monsoon came in. Heavy torrents of rain, big sheets of rain were just falling, thunder, lightning, high winds. It was the most intense storm. And it was washing out all the roads, but still he was determined to go see his prostitute. There was no light, the roads were washing away, they became rivers. And his prostitute's house was on the other side of the river. So he went down to the river and he saw that all the boats were gone. Of course, the boatmen got their boats out of the river. They didn't want them to get destroyed. So he decided, well, I'm strong enough, I'm young enough, I can swim this river. So he went into the river to cross it. Meanwhile, the river's current and waves were coming higher and higher and rougher. And he was swallowing too much water. He needed some help, and he thought he saw a log coming his way, so he grabbed onto the log. And as he climbed up onto the log, he saw it was actually a dead body. So he pushed that away. He continued on. And then he finally got to the other bank, but the other bank was washed away. And as he grasped out, he was only grabbing mud. And there was no place he could see to get out, but he saw up ahead, it looked like roots from a tree coming out. So he got over there and he grabbed what he thought was a root. It was actually a snake.
Ooh.
So he threw that away. And finally, due to some miracle, he was able to get out of this river, and through the darkness of night, he somehow or another found his way to this house, which was completely dark, even though he had instructed her to keep the lights on, to unlock the door. It was locked, and he started pounding on the door. So she comes down, she opens the door, and she says, oh my, look at you, what has happened? He was completely bruised and scratched up and in terrible condition. And she said, if you would just have this much determination to see Krishna, you would be a pure devotee. And that instruction hit his heart so strongly. Wow, he thought, maybe there's a chance. So he immediately left and he went to Vrindavan. And there he started chanting very sincerely, very seriously. But one day he saw this beautiful woman pass by. And his eyes just followed her, and before he knew it, his legs were following her. And she went home and she told her husband, there's some strange man following me. So the husband met him at the door. He could see he was a Brahmana. He was very elegant. He appeared to even be a Vaishnava. And Bilman, all the poor, he requested from him, may I just have a couple minutes with your wife? And the Brahmin said, of course. So he called his wife out. She went before Bilman, all the poor. And he said, would you please give me your hairpins? She took out her hairpins and he poked out his 2 eyes. Not that we should follow this example. It was given at a different time, a different age. And Bilman Kaur, he lived for 700 years. He go on to create some beautiful works of art. And but the point of this is that we should avoid these obstacles on our path of spiritual consciousness, and that we should take other routes than ones that we know will trip us up. Actually, do I have a minute? I had the privilege of having lunch with Dave Amrita one day, and he told a story about one of his disciples who thought he could be Haridas Thakur. He went home to visit his family, and he called the brahmachari, went to visit his family, and he called his old girlfriend and invited her to come over and spend the night. Meanwhile, he sat on his bed and he chanted Hare Krishna all night long. And he told his guru, he was so proud of himself. And his guru had to explain to him, no, don't take chances like this with your spiritual life. The spiritual life is very delicate and needs to be protected. Oh, glorious.
That's a good one. The difference is when Haridas Thakur chanted, he made her a devotee.
No.
That is wild stuff. I did not know that.